करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
Hari Om all and good evening. The topic for the day is value education, and then we need to finally connect it to the English poems that we are planning to take. These collection of English poems are part of our course in Vedanta Academy, and so just as we cover any other book of Swamiji like Vedanta Treatise governing business and relationships or Fall of the Human Intellect, this also has we have taken it in a weekly class study, so it is a good time to revisit these poems. And when our course was going on, this book used to be the very first book that was taught to us in our syllabus. Actually, the other books like The Fall of the Human Intellect, Governing Business and Relationships, The Holocaust of Attachment, these three were written post 2004. I mean, first The Fall of Human Intellect, then the Governing Business Relationship, then Holocaust. So all of this also got added onto the subsequent courses as they came along. And therefore, Fall of the Human Intellect was the first book, or it is the first book still now as the course begins. But the Select English Poems was the book for us in the beginning, and then we had Vedanta Treatise. Like that, it went on. So, what is interesting is, usually Vedanta is associated with Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, various other texts of Vedanta, mostly in Sanskrit and maybe in some other Indian languages also. But the original source of wisdom is that only. But it is our good fortune that we were introduced to at least a few poems in English by which we were introduced to the literature of the West, which also spoke about the same values that we learn in Vedanta. It is not a sort of reinforcement or a stamp of approval that we need from the West, but it is very heartening and interesting to note that the values that are taught to us in Vedanta are universal in nature, and probably any thinker, any liberally educated person arrives at the same conclusion. And this is what is substantiated by the great self-realized masters of this country also. So in that sense, it is easy, these poems are to study, and it teaches us the basic values, which forms the stepping stone for us to get into the deeper studies of, let's say, Atma Bodha, Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads, like that it is. So, there are two words that are used in this topic. One is value, another is education. In fact, real education is only value education, isn't it? Think about it. What is education? Swami Vivekananda defines education as the manifestation of the perfection already in man. It's a fabulous definition. Swami Vivekananda says, education is the manifestation of the perfection already in man. So that which is there within you, which is your perfection, what brings it out, that is real education. And that is why education is actually bringing out. The etymological meaning of the word or etymological derivation of the word education is also giving us the same meaning, that it is to draw out, it is to bring out within you. And this is what is essentially emphasized in Vedanta Academy, that education is basically development of intellect. We have covered it in detail before, so I will not go in detail, but basic differences: intelligence is gathering of knowledge from external sources, and intellect is development of that clarity from within. So there are two ways in which you can paint the paint your pictures in the brain, as it were. One is to draw the pictures on the brain from outside. Another is to keep on polishing your thoughts from inside, by which it is able to reflect whatever is there. That is intellect. So gaining knowledge from outside is intelligence, and using the source of wisdom from inside to reflect it through you, that capacity is called as intellect, and that needs to be developed only by you. Everybody has that capacity, but we need to develop that capacity. External help and external source is also required, and it is definitely much what do you call it? We cannot do without it. It is required also in that sense. It's important. But that external knowledge that we gain from outside must actually trigger this intellect from inside. In that sense, it will become a real education. Otherwise, bereft of this, let us say, anything connected with the Atma or the self or that which is going to come from within, any amount of information that you put into your system from external source, it is as good as storing lot of information in the computer. What is the use of it? The computer may have all the data with reference to how to let's say, what are the precautions to be taken during a fire accident and how to escape from fire. It may have that knowledge stored within it. But if a fire happens in that computer room, the computer cannot save itself by itself. It is just a storage of knowledge, that's all. Exactly like that, all the information, I am talking about even information with reference to spiritual knowledge, so-called texts of Shastras. If all that is stored within you and it is staying there as a input-output device that you use the brain like that, maybe you can talk about it, maybe you can memorize it, all that it is there, and independently that is a virtue also, we'll come back to that. But that is not going to, if that is not going to help you in your life, then that may not be called as real education. So real education is actually associated with values. Even in schools, they talk about a period for moral class or this or that. I do not know if it is there now, and particularly it is there introduced in missionary schools. You will find that, and it is good in a way that to inculcate values, etc. In the young minds. Apart from the subjects that are taught there. But when we studied about, when did we study? Maybe the Guru Purnima talk or something, when the value of the Guru or glory of the Guru, we said any education has to lead you towards the purpose of life only. Then only it is a real education. You ask this question as to why you should learn any knowledge, why you should learn any subject for that matter, and there has to be a definitive answer for you. Only then that education gains value. See, in liberal education also it is said that you need not, in other words, there is a term introduced as liberal education by a thinker called Cardinal Newman. So he is talking about two types of education, and he is deploring the state of English universities in 19th century, which were supposed to be great universities at that point of time. Even there it has deteriorated, he is lamenting, and he introduces two terms, liberal education and servile education. Liberal education is that which you undertake, that which you learn with a very free mind, for the sake of learning it, that's all. There is no utility tag involved in it. Vis-a-vis the servile education, where you have a utility tag attached to it. Utility tag means, what is the use of this education? Suppose you say, I want to learn Sanskrit, I want to learn English, even this English literature, or I want to learn mathematics, Carnatic music, or Hindustani music. I want to learn some language. Immediately, should learn? What is the purpose of it? What is the use of it? Is it going to get you a job? Is it going to feed you? If this question is asked by either you or by others to you, that immediately puts a lid on the enthusiasm of the student to even learn that knowledge. Rather, even if you go ahead and learn that knowledge, it is only for a very limited purpose that you use, you are devaluing the knowledge. So learn it for learning's sake is good, fine. That itself is going to open up. But the point is, when you learn it for learning's sake, what really happens? That is why Swamiji says, any liberal education ultimately leads you to self-realization only. Ekalavya showed that. He was interested in archery and he learnt archery. And that led him to a single pointed concentration. That led him to a great, a level of efficiency, and unconsciously or consciously you won't know, it will lead you towards your spiritual evolution also. That is the power of any liberal education. So this was consciously taught to all the students, and this was the system of education, at least in our country, that education has to lead you towards that. It is a proper education. Otherwise, for your sustenance, we really don't need probably to go through all this motions of study and various things that we go through for sustaining ourselves. Just think about it. Animals exist. They also do all the things that their ancestors and predecessors have done. And their life revolves around basic instincts. Survival, hunger, urge to procreate, shelter, wanting affection and giving affection, companionship, all those things, which are all basic instincts for all the creatures. They are also there. And when the situation demands according to the requirement at that point of time, they are taken care of also. That is the plan of nature. So each and every creature, from the smallest bacteria or ant or a bee or whatever it is, the insect, to the biggest mammal, blue whale or elephant, and birds and reptiles, all in between, everything has a set pattern of life, and they are living their life according to that. And man, being an extension of that in a higher rung of evolution as a social animal, we also share all those instincts in us. So therefore, for you to sustain yourself, we may also live in a way for which a great deal of education is not required in the formal way that we are learning now. But then, why do we need then to go to school to learn other things which is not there for other creatures? That means very clearly the plan of nature is that we are different. We are different in the sense you have evolved to a certain degree where you are expected to lead your life in a different way than that of the animal. Therefore, school, college, education, all this is essential for a human being. All that is required for an animal to lead an animal life is provided at the time of birth itself. So a calf knows how to suckle milk from the mother. Within 45 minutes it may even stand up and run here and there. It knows everything, and as it grows along it picks up everything that is and there. So in other words, it's sort of complete in itself within a few days or so. It knows what to do and what not to do, like that. It is preset and well programmed, a computerized way of life is there. But for a human being, that is not the case. Having reached this highest rung of evolution, if let us say a human baby is left unattended for the first 45 minutes to 1 hour of after birth, we do not know what will happen even to that baby. If a ant were to bite it or a mosquito were to bite it, the child has no capacity to defend itself. It may eventually die also, we do not know. That is the level in which the human baby is there. In other words, at birth it is very disadvantageous position vis-a-vis the other creatures, other animals. But A human being, as he grows and develops himself, he can grow to such an extent that he can even conquer the world. He can overtake not just animals, he can overtake other human beings in every sense of the word and reach the pinnacle of perfection also. So that means what? In terms of our purpose of life, there seems to be something different for us vis-a-vis the other creatures. So therefore, to lead, first of all, a human life and then moving towards the state of God realization seems to be sort of a purpose of a human life. And that is what we are told by the scriptures. That is what great masters have lived and showed. And that is what is an inner urge also. That is very important. Irrespective of whether great masters say, whether you read scriptures or not, there is something within us which is always pushing us towards this evolution. So if you are able to identify it, and if the education is able to properly groom it, then it is a proper education. Okay. Now the question arises, what really defines a human being? Otherwise, as we said, every instinct of animal we also have, they also have. What really makes us different? There is certain conduct that is expected of you. In other words, a person can be like an animal also in a human form. But when do we call a person a real human being? Is that there is some sort of values that he practices. There's some sort of a conduct that he is expected to follow, a norm, etc. like that. All this actually hinges on the capacity to think, which is exclusive for a human being. So we can in one way say that the exclusive faculty that is available for a human being, which is intellect, is what is going to define you as a real human being. Now, what is a value? What is a value? Let us take, for example, few values. What we normally consider as values. Giving is a value. Love is a value. Helping others is a value. Not hurting others or practicing ahimsa is a value. Speaking truth is value. Not wasting food is a value. Keeping things in its own proper place and maintaining cleanliness is a value. Punctuality is a value. Now, as time progresses, the value system of a society, community may change. Therefore, other things which are not, let us say, considered or which are considered or taken for granted also could become a very great value. Suppose in an auditorium, everybody has a mobile phone and you switch off your mobile phone, it is considered as a very great value. You are practicing a very great value. It is something that we need to announce now, because people are not even aware that their mobile phones may ring when the speaker is speaking or the show is going on. So if that awareness of that person has, or the society or the community has come up to that level, then if one person just switches off the mobile phone just before the class is going to begin, he is practicing a great value. Like that it can come. Like how they talk about, when they talk about finding a bridegroom for the daughter or sister who is within quotes a good boy as a alliance. No, he doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink. So these are considered as very good qualities maybe. And if the value system of the society deteriorates at some point of time, it becomes that he has never been arrested even once, he has never visited jail, or he has, like that, if it comes, that is also then a great value according to that time or that system. But whatever we define as a value has a pattern at that point of time. What we need to analyze and understand here is, why is it called a value? Think it this way. You ask this question for yourself, or imagine when you are trying to inculcate these values in your children also. As they are growing, you say that respect the elder, speak the truth, do not hurt the insect or do not hurt others. Like this, you are inculcating some value. Help others. As the child grows and it develops this inquisitive tendency and this questioning tendency, and the child asks you this question as to why I should practice this value. Or suppose you say, speak the truth. Why should I speak the truth? Do you have an answer for that? I am not saying you should have an answer. Have you thought about it, basically? Why I should not hurt others? Okay, the other person is having something which I like. My brother himself is having something which I like, a biscuit or a chocolate. Why cannot I use my power to hit him and take that biscuit and satisfy myself? Why do you say that you must not do it? Why should I be punctual? Why should I clean everything and put in its place properly? Why is it a well? Why should I take bath daily in the morning or do my exercises? Why is it? Why are you imposing like that? Let not the child ask you, you ask for yourself. Try to find out a satisfactory answer for yourself. If you listen to all the Swamiji's lectures in the past decade at least or so, in every lecture he is only to the point of monotony is reinforcing again and again about development of intellect. So when it comes to how to develop the intellect, he says, remember two things. Never take anything for granted. Second, question everything. This sense of questioning comes early in the childhood, let's say about, I do not know, 7, 8 years, around that period. That's when the intellect starts to blossom. The questioning tendency comes. Once certain patterns are set into our groove in the childhood and it becomes a character and a habit in our life, it becomes very difficult for us to change later. That is understandable. But what is interesting is it is even difficult for us to question it later. It becomes obvious for us. It is a blasphemy sometimes to ask these questions also. So it is easy to ask these questions when you are young. When you ask these questions, do not take anything for granted. That applies to this also. That is why even as you read Vedanta treatise, even as you study Gita, there is a lot of devotion attached to it. There is a lot of sense of respect attached to it. But still question. Question as to why it is being said like that. What is the purpose behind it? This type of a inquisitive nature or tendency to that is to question has to be encouraged. And incidentally, I'm deviating. What will in fact help this also a keen sense of observation. So if you are taking your child even outside and bringing him back to home, you just ask him as to what all he has observed. Not just with reference to memory or recollection. You can ask certain questions with reference to that. You yourself can ask, and even as you grow, encourage the child to ask the question as to various things around him, which he can observe also. That, in other words, it is not to understand the science, maths, physics and chemistry behind whatever is happening around us, but we are encouraging this questioning tendency, that inquiring principle, which is very important for our self-evolution also. So just as the senses are taking in various information and inputs, if it is parallelly processed with this questioning aspect, so it could be that why is a house built like this, or why is the color given like this, it can be, I am just saying. So if that questioning tendency is there, it is going to develop this inquiring principle in you. Now coming back here, you think about it as to why it is so. Love, today is a auspicious day for Christians. Christmas is celebrated today. A statement is attributed to Jesus Christ that love thy neighbor as thyself. It's a very fabulous quote, I would say, and particularly when he uses the term neighbor for extending our love. Now, why should you love your neighbor? Can I remain indifferent? Okay, I am not hating him also. can I remain indifferent? Or why should I not hate? Why should I not show any negative emotion or anger or hatred towards him? Why? Why not? He is actually a person who bothers me all the time. He's not very friendly to me. Why should I love this neighbor? This is a very genuine question only. Even if the neighbor is good also, you ask this question, why I should love the neighbor? Why I should be punctual? Why I should clean whatever has to be there outside or whatever it is? If so, Swami Ramatirtha says, the culmination of all religions is Vedanta. Various religions with various mandates and maxims and doctrines, they are giving set of do's and don'ts which may be right, which enforces these values. Thou shalt do, thou shalt not do, like that it is given. So, if a person is going to have full faith in Jesus Christ, in fact, what is more inspiring, at least for us, is the faith of a person who has on Jesus Christ, like that, it is much more powerful than Christ also for him, because that faith has that power. Suppose if he believes for sure that Christ is going to be his savior, and he is going to truly follow these principles that are given like this, love thy neighbor as thyself, etc. Probably he will be set on the path. There is nothing that is required for him. But you have to appreciate that the world that was 2000 years ago, the world that was 1000 years ago, and the world that is now has substantially changed in terms of its outlook, in terms of its scientific temper, etc. There has been a lot of growth in science, technology, and the knowledge aspect of the world itself. So therefore, the same principle that applied for a man's evolution, I am talking in terms of path, the Sanatana Dharma principle will not change. In terms of the methodology, what was applicable 1500 years ago, 2000 years ago, 1000 years ago may not be applicable now. Though the core principle of Sanatana Dharma is the same, the method and the way by which it has to be inculcated in the human minds might vary. And it may vary 500 years later also. So if you say just believe in Jesus Christ, he is going to save you. If he is turning back and asking you, why, how do you say that? He has given his life, he has given his blood for your sake. What is the blood connection between him and me? That if you ask, there is no answer for that. Therefore, you need to present the values, the education, the knowledge in a way which is scientifically appealing, and that is why Advaita Vedanta is universally appealing. You look into the YouTube of the Vedanta videos, millions and millions of videos are centered around on this principle of Advaita Vedanta only. Probably even fanatic religious people from other religions also, because of their strong root in whatever they are believing, they may not accept this. But very many thinkers have said, I may not accept whatever you are saying in Vedanta, but I have nothing to say against it. Because it's quite scientific, that's all it is. So this is the culmination of all religions. Suppose if all the religions say, do speak the truth, respect elders or various other values, why it is to be done, the proper answer and the culmination of all that comes in Vedanta. So in other words, every education finally culminates to this. So think about it. Why you should love others? If you are, unless otherwise you are going to connect it to your own real being, the education really does not gel with you. So ultimately it starts from the point of that I am looking for happiness. And that happiness is actually in feeling of that oneness. And feeling of oneness is actually what is the meaning of love. So if I am going to have a hatred towards my neighbor, and if I am going to score some brownie points based on a short-term kick that I get out of it, ultimately I am remaining agitated. So this is not what probably I want to be. All this is what religion is supposed to teach, and all this is what actually Vedanta is also teaching us, but it gives a strong reason and logic for you to think about and inculcate this. And again we emphasize, merely understanding this at the intellectual level is not enough, but for you to change your thought pattern, a strong input has to be given from the intellect level. So only when you think about it, only when you reflect it, it can percolate down to the level of your emotions. Ultimately, what counts is the transformation of your personality and that how it shows us your emotions. But it has to come from a strong reason and logic. So even if I remain indifferent to my neighbor without showing hatred or love, that is also not enough. That may be better than hatred, but that's not enough. I have to embrace him positively with love, because unless otherwise I feel this oneness with him, if I'm always going to have some differentiation with him, that is not going to really help me get onto my path, get onto my final goal also, which is what I am really seeking. So the root cause analysis is what Vedanta, so each and every knowledge, therefore, each and every value, therefore, is connected ultimately to the self. Why should I be clean? What is the big deal if things are, laid out here and there without any proper structure or order? What is the big deal? It is only, my mind must be pure and I should reach the self. What is the harm if my room is untidy and computer is untidy with all the files here and there? What is the big deal? No, it is not like that. If you are not able to be aware of the gross dirt that is there outside you, how are you going to be aware of the dirt that is inside you? And that which you are ultimately seeking, nirdosham hi samam brahma, it is absolute purity. If you are going to seek absolute purity, how can you seek that purity in an impure environment, outside and inside, both? So therefore, a strong case for cleanliness is put forward here. Therefore, cleanliness is a value. Therefore, punctuality is a value. If you postpone everything, your self-realization is postponed. So what? Then what happens? Even one Janma, if you think it is going to be postponed, you do not know what you will go through. Each and a 5-minute dream, you may have a nightmare and it will have an impact for you that you have lived a life of 100 years in the dream. Like that it is. Can you imagine what type of contract you are signing when you are asking for one more Janma? We do not know all these things. I mean, ignorance is bliss. We are living just like that. But this is what Vedanta emphasizes. That you need to quickly go through that, for which you have to finish everything in time, for which you have to be on time every time. Incidentally, all these probably punctuality etc. is not talked about in, let's say, a epic like Mahabharata. Why? That's why I said the value system of the people at that point of time was different. They just practiced it. It was a part and parcel of their life as it is. So it needs to be given as a value now when the system has deteriorated to such an extent. Karna had the opportunity to knock off Arjuna on the 16th day battle and he stopped the battle because the sun has set. He just practices just like that. If Arjuna was killed, the whole thing would have been over for the Pandavas. But he just practiced that just like that. Everybody practiced it, that's all. Even as it is said that Duryodhana, even others, they used to perform their dawn and dusk rituals even as the war was going on. These were all taken normally, that's about all. So that was probably the value system that was being practiced at that point of time. Now, so therefore, having understood this, if we come to the definition of a value, what is a value? Value is that fixation of the intellect, practicing which it helps you to reach your goal. That is a value. See, we don't say value means it has a value, and what is the value? It can be exchanged for your exchange means it, by practicing which you can go towards your evolution. That is a value. See, you can say that person has a value. What value? He is always on time, or he is always not gossiping. We say all this is value. You don't say that person smokes 100 cigarettes a day. That is his value. You don't say that that person always speaks lie. That is his value. We don't relate value to these things, though some person may constantly do it. So value means only higher value. And when do we say something is higher? we have discussed this before again, only a human being can talk in terms of a higher nature and a lower nature. The Supreme Self is the original nature of all beings, but the capacity to reach the Supreme Self is there only for a human being. So in the process of evolution, as we come from lower creatures to human beings, it is one step in this. It is a achievement, let us say, by itself. So we are fortunate that we are born as a human being. But then we continue to live with animalistic tendencies in the initial stages, that is our lower nature. But constantly there is a pull from us from the higher nature. So anything that you practice which makes you go from this lower nature to higher nature, that is called as a value. And the side effect of practicing this value is that it helps you to plan various other things which reinforces other values. That is why Swamiji says in the 35 qualities of Bhakta given in the 12th chapter of Gita, or 20 qualities of Jnani that is given in the 13th chapter of Gita, or various qualities, 26 qualities I think are given of a divine person in the 16th chapter. Various qualities are also given in Gita. If you look at these qualities in totality, it will be very difficult for us to even conceive of those qualities and then forget about practicing it. It may sometimes depress us, so if we think of practicing those values. But he says, get inspired about one or two of them. Try to fixate on that and practice those values. You will find that automatically all other things will develop within you. It's like filling a vessel which has various what you call that, input points. Once you pour the water through one of the inputs, one of the ways or the tap or whatever it is, you fill the water, it fills the base, and then when the water rises, all the other outlets are also filled to the same level. Exactly like that, if you feed yourself of one particular value or two values also, and diligently when you go through it and practice it, all other things are also going to develop in you. When you have a strong value, see, Annam Rakshasva is a statement of the Upanishad. So not wasting food that is laid out on your plate or the banana leaf that you are eating is a great value, definitely a great value. Till today, to the point of fault, people practice it actually. But then, if you have this value, somebody, serves you much more than what you require. Should you eat it? Probably no. But then if you practice this value to a good extent, what will happen is, you will have the strong conviction to plan what and how much you must eat. You will say no even while serving itself. That's what will happen. So, if we are not getting this education behind practicing these values, what happens is that the value might lose its value because you do not know where to draw the line. And this is where sense of proportion comes in for the value. See, do people who do not have self-knowledge or Vedanta, a little bit background, do they not have values? Of course, every person, most people in the world have some value or the other, or very many values that, and where did they get these values from? By the way of life, by their society, by their ancestors, their family. If in a family grandfather is giving, the father is giving, the son will also give. It will automatically come to him. Like a herd instinct, they will follow that. If somebody is going to the temple and others are also going to temple, this going to temple habit will be inculcated in this person, like that it is. If anybody who comes, you first offer him a cup of coffee or a milk or something like that, this person will also have that value, and that he will pass on to the next generation also. Like that, very many people all over the world, many people have values. You cannot say that all are connected to Vedanta, all are questioning and all have, no. But then what is the drawback? Drawback means what can happen? it becomes just a mechanical practicing of these values. When it becomes a mechanical practicing of these values, sometimes when it is inculcated or when it is forced upon others, it may have a counterproductive effort also. Suppose if a teenager is there and he wants to go and play out with his friends and there is a puja and you say you have to sit through this ritual and this and that, for the force of you he may sit through, but you won't realize that he might develop an aversion towards that ritual. He may develop aversion towards God also, we do not know. Later, how and what is the effect or impact of him in a later part of life, that is different. But the point is, there is a way by which this has to be inculcated in him, means parallelly as you inculcate these things as a young boy or girl that they are growing up, a parallel knowledge also has to be given to them. Only then value will retain its value. When a student or when a child is not able to question at that age, this has to be inculcated, no doubt. As I said, the groove has to be set there. But at the age when they question, that is the time knowledge has to be given. Therefore, giving the knowledge of Vedanta as a reason, logic and a backup of these things is a must. And so, if you take the current situation, current scenario of the world that we are living, Vedanta definitely is a very necessary knowledge. It is a necessary knowledge. It has to be somehow, we do not know how, but it has to be inculcated in all school syllabus and education, something like that. Because, as we said, in the good old days, when the system of education was Gurukula or something, the master takes in the student and it is like incubating him in such a way that he produces a great finished product out of the Gurukula system when his education is over. But think about it, if the teacher-student relationship and the value education is like that in our schooling system, it may not be the case. It is not the case. So therefore, in fact, not just that. There are two schools which are asking private counselors and private people as to do you teach thinking to the students like that. It is. See, this very question itself is very sort of jarring. What is the role of a school? What is the role of a teacher? It is to develop this thinking habit in the student. And with that thinking habit, when he is supposed to make choices, particularly when he is going to choose a course of study in the 11th standard or so, a commerce group or science group or something, on what basis he chooses, to that extent his intellect must have developed at that point of time. The question is, are the students choosing like that? So many people, even in this youth camp we saw, they are very much not clear of what it is that they are going to pursue, and that pursuit after that school or university is also based on maybe herd instinct and various other factors that are there. So the purpose of the education, that it is to inculcate these values, and that is why he is called as an acharya. In the good old days he is called as an acharya because he leads the path and then he educates him also, and therefore he is called as a acharya, the person. So invariably the education is through contact, it is through example, and these teachers live that life and the student is able to absorb that life. That is the same case with parents also. Therefore the inculcation of values starts with us, starts with the adults, so it has to be like that, and then it will slowly get inculcated. Without again this knowledge, we said something about this sense of proportion. Value loses its value. If you consider value is like a medicine, proportion is like the dosage of the medicine. So the medicine has its full effect only if it is given in proper dosages. If without, again proportion is thought about and implemented by the intellect. If you are not going to have this education and the application of the intellect behind your value, it becomes a fanatic attachment to the value. Then it loses its value. Suppose you are having a value that you have to get up early in the morning and study, and one day your friend or your relative comes early in the morning to the airport or station. That day you will have to probably not study, go to the station and receive. No, for me, come what may. Because see, usually the value gets sacrificed when there is a stake against it, isn't it? Many people may even have value, but when you offer a temptation against that value, at some point of time that elasticity breaks. And that is why Shakespeare says, we will study as we go along in the poem, to thine own self be true and it must follow as night the day. If you are having values and if you are being true to yourself, to those values, you must follow it as the night follows the day. That means no compromise. Suppose you say, I want to study this, we want to spread this knowledge, and this is what is inspiring, this is what is probably we have been taught, and we need to undertake this. We also conduct this yajna for Sunandaji, and by which we can spread the Bhagavad Gita knowledge, etc. Definitely for conducting of the yajna and other events like this, we do need funds. So we ask for donation. And for a cause, obviously we can always ask for a cause and conduct the event. These are all it is a struggle, but it is definitely has to be done. If somebody says, okay, you are doing this thing full time, reading and spreading Vedanta according to whatever you have your conviction, but why don't you come and work in my company? I'll give you good salary, which may be, let's say, ₹1,00,000. ₹1,00,000 I give you. You do your Vedanta classes and other things also, you study also, but you can work also. What's the harm? You need not, let's say, worry about money. From his point, it might be a very fair thing to say like that. But I say, no, sir, this is what I have undertaken to do and this is what I want to do. I am not interested in taking up a job, I don't want it. Suppose he says, instead of 1 lakh, if he is saying, I am going to give you 10 lakhs per month. 10 lakhs per month. Even then I say, sir, no, not required. I'll just continue whatever I am doing. Suppose he says 1 crore per month. If he offers like that, then I am, let's say, thinking, after all, I might not need that money, but to conduct that yajna, we are going from person to person asking for funds. Why not use this funds for that, or why not donate it to academy? Like that it is. All this is very, very sort of a justifiable thought that will come. And if it is not 1 crore, I may fall for a 10 crore or something like that. Okay. So that means every value then seems to have like an elasticity point where it is broken. But those who really have values, they say, as Shakespeare says, it must follow as night follows the day. You don't compromise on anything, be it 1 rupee, be it 10 rupees, or in other. I am talking in terms of value, money. It could be any other value also. You don't exchange it for anything else. So therefore, value has a value when you stand by it, and then only it goes. But here is where the sense of proportion comes. If you have to stick to your values, is it at all cost, or when and how do you make intelligent exceptions to it? That is where sense of proportion comes. Sense of proportion, as I said, is like dosage to the medicine. So if you are having that value of not leaving your early morning studies or exercises for that matter, but one day if you have to go to this, then that day you make an intelligent exception to your daily routine practicing value. For what? But it is only to uphold a higher value. So the sense of proportion is when you are able to make an intelligent exception to the rule only to uphold a higher value. That means the thumb rule is lower has to be sacrificed for the higher. This is the sort of a law, you can take it for practicing values. Swamiji has given this example in public lectures also. He has been practicing this value of not eating in between meals. He got this habit when he was young, he said, maybe 10, 12 years old. From that time onwards, not eating in between meals means you have substantial meals during breakfast, lunch, dinner. 3 times means 3 times, 4 times means 4 times, whatever it is, you fix it. And only during that time you will eat. We have this habit, as and when people offer something, a chai or samosa in between we can have, or you go to the kitchen, take something, put it in your mouth and come. Or even we have that, when they sell peanuts in the bus stand, sometimes I have seen in Tamil Nadu, I do not know, maybe in other parts of India also. When they sell these peanuts, they call it as time pass, meaning don't waste your time, eat something. Like that, you keep on eating something in between. this is not really a virtue. As we said in the last class, you are not treating your body properly. But so he has got this habit and a value that he will not eat in between meals. But one day, while being in Australia or Singapore, wherever, for a lecture, he is visiting a devotee's house, and the devotee has been waiting for Swamiji's arrival for maybe a year or so. That she's waiting for him, and with all her devotion, love, and affection, she's preparing a sweet and giving it to Swamiji, and that is at 5 o'clock in the evening, which is not his eating time. So, at that point of time, should he stick to the value of not eating in between meals or accept it and eat it in front of her? So, Swamiji said, I ate it. I very happily ate it, because you are valuing the devotion shown by a person, and you are reciprocating that love by accepting that. You are breaking this value of eating in between meals, but you are upholding a greater value there. Only then it makes sense. So this is called as a sense of proportion. Now this you cannot say that I am using sense of proportion daily and keep on breaking. Then it's not a value at all. You are strictly following the value, but you make intelligent exceptions when required in order to uphold a higher value. Now let us take this example hypothetically to prove the point that suppose with all the love and affection that same lady gives a well prepared dish which is but a non-vegetarian dish, and Swamiji has a value for vegetarian food. Now the question is whether he will eat or not. Should he eat or not? Probably he will not eat. Not probably, surely he will not eat. Why he will not eat? There is a value of not eating in between meals. There is a value of reciprocating the affection and devotion of a devotee. There is a value of this universal love, which is to not even think of harming other animals, and not definitely for your consumption. So when it comes to evaluating these two values, this is definitely higher. So he may say that I accept your love and affection, but I will not have this food. This is how it is. So sense of proportion can be used only when you are clear with the hierarchy of values, and that can happen only when you are able to connect these values to the highest level of self or self-realization, and that is where Vedanta helps us. Now why we are talking about value education today is, these values needs to be inculcated in small doses to the children, and one way of doing that is through this poems. See, this Vedanta contains vast, it's a vast ocean of knowledge, and all the pearls of all wisdom is there, and you need to spend a lot of time and energy delving deep into it and deriving everything, and it is worth your time and effort. But for this to be inculcated at a young age, particularly when all of us now are studying through English medium schools, we have also gone through, we are taught certain poems in English also, but we may not know the full impact of those poems. And let us be clear, these poets are also, when we talk about the quality of a poet is one who is an inspired person. He is called as a Kavi. In Sanskrit, a self-realized person is also called as a Kavi. Ishavasya Mantra 8 also we studied that. Kavi means a seer. He is able to, in an inspired way, visualize something. And in that inspired state, what comes out of him is a poetry. Swami Ramatirtha is a very great example of that. You can see that, outpouring of his thoughts and emotions when he is in a very inspired state. In every language, the poetry comes for him. Whether it's Punjabi, Urdu, Sanskrit or English, it just flows out of him. So, these thinkers and the great poets of the West also, we are going to see that in some of the poems, particularly when we see daffodils, you will see that it is outpouring of their feelings and emotions that comes out. And in these small poems that are compiled, these are not authored obviously by Swamiji, but a great work has been done by him to derive the Vedantic messages from these poems. Select English Poems is the book. For those who are interested, I would say that get hold of this book. There are two things: Select English Poems as a book and Select English Poems as a talk book where Swamiji has read out the poems and the commentary also. And probably because of association of his father and his father with his related guru in Chennai, he was introduced to these poems at a young age. And then when later he studied Bhagavad Gita and Vedanta, he was able to correlate this with the Vedantic principles also. See, it's interesting that English is not considered as a very classical language. Even in the Europe, English was not taught in schools and universities as a language, as a classical language like, let's say, French or Latin, Greek. These were considered as classical languages even in Europe. I think it was first introduced in Madras University as a language, as a separate study. Now it is there all over. And it is very inspiring. So there need not be any hatred for a particular language or any other feeling towards that. Though we understand the depth to which our languages have gone, and Sanskrit particularly it is there, we find that when the thought gets reflected somewhere outside you also, you feel more inspired about the values that are there within us. For example, when in American colleges now they talk about the greatness of Bhagavad Gita, we feel inspired about it. That's how it has become, like that is it. When Japanese and Chinese and Americans practice yoga, then we see the power of yoga. When it was available in the street corners everywhere, we did not value it like that it is. So it is like that. We are able to feel inspired. It is just like a Philip, it is just like a prop. When you see that these are talking about the same things, and obviously the depth with which our rishis have gone, Bhagavad Gita has gone, definitely not these poets and not these poems, but it is able to kindle your interest. And when you catch hold of one thread of that, it takes you to the same depth only. So from that angle, probably we can see these poems, and in a way, since all the children and everybody is studying in English medium school and some of these poems may be there also, it can be in, suppose you say Vedanta class, Bhagavad Gita, people will run away. But when you say English poems, then they may be curious as to what it is. And then from there, what we are going to derive the same values that are given in Vedanta also. So this Select English Poems is a collection of 20 poems, out of which the last 3 poems are long poems. It is talking about the devastating effect of attachment. That is Ladomia by Wordsworth, Andrea del Sarto by Robert Browning, and Sohrab and Rustum by Matthew Arnold. Sohrab and Rustum is originally I think a Persian epic which is translated into English, and it's a fabulous translation. And then other 17 poems, out of which one is a letter and one is a portion of the play, Julius Caesar, Mark Antony's oration, others are there. These are simple 1-page, 2-page poems which we can also simply read. And though we are not very comfortable, even as we studied in the school for the sake of marks and other things, we approach that. Thanks to Swamiji, thanks to Academy, when we studied these poems, we were able to relate to it. And particularly Shakespeare and other plays, etc., we cannot fully read. That requires a lot of stamina and energy. But we see it through movies also. But since these poems are small, we can take it up and read. So we begin with the poems from the next class. And the idea of the poem is to derive the 1 or 2 values that are given there. You relate it to Vedanta then, at the depth of which you will be able to practice what is given. Thank you very much.
Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.